good evening. I hope you're all having a wonderful, spooky evening. Tonight's performance... hello, Ryan. Nice of all of you to... Ah, yes, that is a thing. Whoops. Excuse me a moment, let me fix that. Everything is falling apart as we see. Allow me to fix that. I'm obviously not going to fix myself. I'm more or less going to hide this. Shh. Nobody saw. Nobody saw. There we go. Yeah, totally holding it. No chat box. That's because it's kind of busted. Just very small, yes. Give me a moment to fix that. I didn't think any of this through. And it shows. So, full disclaimer. Tonight's little shindig is going to be more on the performance side. Kind of like the karaoke's. So I won't be talking all that much. A mathematics book's scary to some. Exactly why we're using it. Because I didn't have the time to actually... there we go. 26. Oh, okay, that works. Y'all will be reappearing very shortly. I hope. Okay. Any second now. Also upside down? Are you... Oh my god, you're right. Oh dear. What in the name of Chuck? There we go. Also upside down, yeah. Yes, the book is intentionally flipped. That's part of its charm. Okay. Let me go ahead and grab this link. Reinsert it. Yes, I know how to read. Still small. Okay. Let's go ahead and crank this up to 40. Please, keyboard, work with me. Can't stay for long? Alrighty. Enjoy the VOD when it comes back. Oh. Okay. Boom. And I will go ahead and actually raise this up because it's getting on my nerves. There we go. Okay, chat should be fine now. Yeah, bony letters, I know. Fun, right? Well, you're in for a lovely night. However, I will mention that unfortunately, I was not able to have the time to make or grab some BGMs. So, we're going to work with this as best we can. I will do my best to be your wonderful audiobook reader. Okay, let's see. First story rereading. Also, let me do my introduction real quick. For those who may not know me, my name is Ricky T. Bones. I'm a V singer, V producer, and now your horror show host for the night. I've been reading books since I was a kid. Sadly, no King in Yellow tonight. Lovecraft wasn't on my menu. Oh, for goodness sake, please. Instead, we'll be reading some good poems from Edgar Allan Poe, but we're starting with a much less scary story for those who aren't really into the scary stuff. At least I think it's less scary. What about The Raven? That will be later on. Okay. So, introductions are out of the way. And I do want to say that I will be, like I said, focused on performance. So, keynote. I have acquired a transcript of Teeny Tiny and the Witch Woman by looking at images. I do own the Scholastic video, and it's hard to track down the actual book, so please don't sue. Secondly, we'll be reading Edgar Allan Poe directly from the book, so I might look like I'm sleepy or closing my eyes at some point. And then our last story of the night will be very special. Don't worry, mate. Okay, I'm trying. Alright. And I do apologize, no BGM tonight, just because I didn't have enough time. I did create some really cool chase BGM, but I'll share that some other day. Alright. And we determined last time that reverb while I was talking would be a good idea, but for the sake of this story and this story alone, I will be using reverb selectively. Alright. Without further ado, this is Teeny Tiny and the Witch Woman by Barbara K. Walker. In case any of y'all get spooked by certain stories or such, you can look for this text to see what exactly we're reading at the moment. I will say the Edgar Allan Poe stories are a bit descriptive in gory detail, so I'll put up disclaimers as we get to them. But for now, this one's just kind of creepy. Alright. Just move it over here a bit. And we're good to go. If you get too spooked out, you'll turn on your lights. Alrighty. Here we go. Once there was, and twice there wasn't. Long ago, a family of 3 brothers. Big one, in the middle, and teeny tiny. Every day, their mother said, "You can play anywhere in the village, but do not go into the forest. Your granny says, a wit..." Banana Man. First and only warning. Please. Do not spam. We will continue on. If I see that again, please, do know I have the ability to time you out. This is your one and only warning. Okay, buddy? Thank you. Every day, their mother said, "You can play anywhere in the village, but do not go into the forest. Your granny says a witch woman lives there, where the trees are darkest. She eats little children and uses their bones to make a fence around her house." Big one and in the middle laughed, but Teeny Tiny shivered. He was glad to play there in the warm sunshine, away from the forest. You can type paragraphs all you like. It's no problem. It's just a matter of spamming or doing random stuff. Don't worry. Don't worry. Paragraphs are paragraphs. At least they make sense. One morning, when no one was looking, Big One said, "Let's go into the forest to play." "Yes," agreed In the Middle. "I'm not afraid of any old witch woman. Come on, Teeny Tiny." Now, Teeny Tiny didn't want to go, but he went anyway. "I'll keep my eyes open and my legs ready to run," he told himself. They walked... Big One, In the Middle, and Teeny Tiny played all day in the forest. The deep, dark shadows made fine hiding places, and the wild berries in the clearings were made for a delicious lunch. Little by little, the shadows grew longer, and Big One, In the Middle, and Teeny Tiny grew hungry. But no matter where they looked, they could not find a path to the village. At last, Teeny Tiny climbed a tree to look farther. "I see a light," he called. "Let's go there. It may be a house." They walked and they walked till they came to a little house. all by itself in the darkest part of the forest. All around the house there was a knobby white fence. The gate clattered as they pushed against it. Just then, the door of the house opens, and an old woman stood in the doorway. But what a strange old woman she was, with her nose pointed turned down and her chin turned up, just the points of her teeth showing.
Come in, my children,
she called, and she beckoned them with a bony finger. Big One and In the Middle started towards the open door, but Teeny Tiny whispered, "Wait! Remember what our granny said?" "Oh, that can't be the witch woman," said Big One. "She's so kind to ask us in." "I'm tired and hungry," said In the Middle. "You're just afraid because you're little."
"Afraid?"
The old woman cackled. She had heard them.
"You needn't be afraid of me. I love little children. Come in,"
she coaxed.
"Stay with me. Share my dinner. Your own nice warm beds are far away, but I have room for all of you in my little house tonight. Tomorrow I shall show you your way home, but come now and smell the good dinner I have ready for you."
And the old woman hobbled over to the fireplace. She took the lid off of her huge iron kettle and what good smells came out of that kettle. "Come on," said Big One. "I'm going inside."
"Good boy,"
said the old woman.
"You may call me Auntie."
And she waited by the door as In the Middle and Teeny Tiny followed Big One into the house. While the old woman set 3 extra places at the dinner table, Teeny Tiny looked at all that he could see. Over in the corner of the room was a crooked little wooden cage. "Auntie," he asked, "what do you keep in your cage?"
"In my cage? Oh, sometimes I keep stray dogs, and sometimes I keep stray cats,"
answered the old woman. "And sometimes stray children?" wondered Teeny Tiny. But he didn't say anything. It was a very good dinner that the old woman scooped up out of the kettle, with bits of tender meat and plenty of rice. The boys ate, and the good food and the warm fire made them very sleepy.
"You must be tired,"
said the old woman.
"Come now into the bedroom, and I'll put you in my nice soft beds."
Sure enough, she tucked Big One into one bed, In the Middle into a second bed, and Teeny Tiny into a third bed.
"Now sleep well,"
she said.
"And tomorrow, just see if I don't show you your way home."
Leaving the door ajar, she went out into the kitchen. Teeny Tiny waited until he heard her picking up the dishes, and then he tiptoed to the window to look outside. The moon had risen, and the moonlight shone upon that knobby white fence. Was it a wooden fence? No! It was made of bones! Leg bones! Arm bones! Little people bones! Teeny Tiny stared at the fence, and then he looked at Big One and In the Middle, already sound asleep. They didn't know, but Teeny Tiny did. This was indeed the house of the witch woman their granny had told them about. Teeny Tiny tiptoed back to bed. As he lay there, he could see the old woman tying pieces of rope together. He could hear her sharpening and sharpening a great long knife, and all the while she hummed a sleepy song. After a while, the old woman called,
Who is awake and who is asleep?
"The littlest one is awake," he answered.
What? Teeny tiny, why don't you sleep?
Asked the old woman. "Well, Auntie, my mother always cooks me an egg before I go to bed. Then I go to sleep," said Teeny Tiny. So the old woman cooked an egg, and Teeny Tiny ate it. But he still did not go to sleep. After a while, she called again.
Who is awake and who is asleep?
"The littlest one is awake," answered Teeny Tiny.
What? Still awake? What will help you go to sleep?
Essentially, yeah, that's what it is. That's what I found online, anyway. The old woman asked. "Well, Auntie, my mother gives me popcorn and raisins to eat at bedtime. Then I go to sleep," said Teeny Tiny. So the old woman brought him popcorn and raisins, but still he did not go to sleep. After a while, she called out again.
Who is awake and who is asleep?
"The littlest one is awake," answered Teeny Tiny.
What? Still awake, are you? What can I get you that will help you to sleep?
"Well, Auntie, all that popcorn has made me thirsty. At home, when I am thirsty, my mother goes to the well to fetch me a water in a sieve. When she brings it back, I drink it. Then I go to sleep," said Teeny Tiny. As the old woman bent over to fetch her sieve, by the way, that's for some of you who are cooking, who know how to cook, that's a colander, or just some sort of mesh thing to drain stuff with. That's what a sieve is. As the old woman bent over to fetch her sieve, a cake of soap fell out of her apron pocket.
Oh dear,
The old woman mumbled aloud.
my magic objects. Better to leave them here than safe than lose them outside in the dark by the well.
She picked up the cake of soap. Then, reaching into her apron pocket, she took out what was left, a needle and a short, sharp knife, and she laid all three things on a high shelf. Then she opened the door softly and started towards the well. All along, Teeny Tiny had been listening carefully. As soon as the old woman was gone, he shook his brothers. "Wake up!" he whispered. "Auntie is that witch woman! Her fence is made of people's bones. She has already sharpened her long knife. If we do not hurry, we'll be her dinner tomorrow." Big One and In the Middle heard him, and how they scrambled out of bed. As they were running through the door, Teeny Tiny remembered the magic objects the witch woman had so carefully laid on the high shelf. A cake of soap, a needle, and a short, sharp knife. "Lift me up," he said to Big One. "If she says they're magic, they may just be magic. I'll take them along and see." 1, 2, 3, he tucked them into his pocket and then ran out with his brothers down the moonlit path. As for the old woman, she couldn't catch any water in the sieve, and she couldn't catch any water in the sieve, and because witches are not very bright without their magic, she couldn't understand why. So home she went. When she looked for Teeny Tiny, he was gone, and so were his brothers. So away she went, running after them. Now Teeny Tiny was watching behind him. As the old woman came closer and closer, he took out the cake of soap. "I'll try this first," he said. "If this isn't magic, at least she may slip on it. Then we can get away from her." And he threw the cake of soap right into her path.
"Oh!"
she cried.
"You took my magic soap from my little shelf."
And she shook her fist at Teeny Tiny. Just then, the cake of soap began to grow and grow, and it became a mountain, slippery all around. The boys kept on running, glad of that soap, but the old woman slipped and slithered trying to get up over the mountain.
"It's no use,"
she said at last.
"I'll just have to run around it."
And she ran until she came to the other side.
"Now I'll catch you."
And Teeny Tiny heard her. They kept running and running till Teeny Tiny could hear the witch woman's apron flapping right behind him. Then, carefully, he picked the needle out of his pocket. "Whether it's magic or not, I'll prick her with this sharp needle," he said to himself. But whoops! It slipped out of his hand and fell behind him. "Oh!"
"Oh!"
cried the witch woman.
"You found my magic needle too!"
And she shook her fist at Teeny Tiny. At that moment, the needle began to grow and grow until it became a whole mountain of needles, all sticky and prickly and sharp as they could be. Well, the boys ran on, but the witch woman had to stop because of the needles. She tried and tried to get over those needles. At last, she said,
"It's no use. I'll run around them."
And she ran and ran until she came to the other side.
"Now I'll catch you,"
she cried. They kept running and running and running. Teeny Tiny could hear the old woman panting and puffing just behind them. With all his strength, he threw the knife on the path right in front of the witch woman. "It's our only chance," he said. "If it isn't magic, at least she may cut her foot on it, and then we can get away from her."
"Oh!"
she cried.
"You took my magic knife too!"
And she shook her fist at Teeny Tiny. At that moment, that sharp knife cut a crack in the earth so long and so wide that the witch woman couldn't run around it. She couldn't jump over it, and she couldn't jump over it. Shaking both her fists, she shouted,
"I'll get you next time!"
And she turned around and hobbled home. The three boys never stopped running until they got to their own house. As for that witch woman, may she wait a long, long time before she hears a knock at her door again. The end. That's from a Scholastic Video DVD that I grew up with, actually. It's where I actually learned how, like, I picked up the inverted talking. I don't recommend you try it without proper practice and with a good throat, because it does tend to screw up if you do it wrong, but it's essentially just breathing in and closing your throat a little bit, like, "Hi there." And then there's just a couple ways you can maneuver it. But with that being said, we are no longer going to have to use that voice. So we will throw on the cinematic reverb. Oh, wait. That doesn't sound cinematic anymore. Let me... I forgot you had a YouTube account. That's Papa Bones, everybody. Hi, Dad. Okay, where is... I'm going to bring back normal reverb for a second here. Okay. There. Check. Check. Okay. Yeah, that sounds fine. Okay, let me know if this gets on your nerves because this is just the Reaver by itself now. We're going to be reading Great Tales and Poems of Edgar Allan Poe. I think I'm going to go ahead and start this one dry. And then we can try... Yeah, we're going to keep it dry, actually. So let me go ahead and switch things up. Ah, that's the wrong one. Because I renamed it improperly. Unfortunate. So, Edgar Allan Poe is a great writer of a previous time. There may be words you might not understand. And there is descriptive text that is very flavorful. So viewer discretion is advised. The Telltale Heart contains depictions of murder. That's the most I know about it, and may or may not be grotesque. You have been warned. And I might get a little too into character, just fair warning. Here we go. And I haven't read this one. This is the one I haven't read. Oh, God. True. Nervous. Very, very dreadfully nervous I had been and am. But why will you say that I am mad? The disease had sharpened my sense, not destroyed or not dulled them. Above all was the sense of hearing. Acute. I heard all things in the heaven and in the earth. I heard many things in hell. How then am I mad? Hearken, and observe how healthily, how calmly I can tell you the whole story. It is impossible to say how first the idea entered my brain, but once conceived, it haunted me day and night. Object, there was none. Passion, there was none. I loved the old man. He had never wronged me. He had never given me insult. For his gold I had no desire. I think it was his eye. Yes, it was this. One of his eyes resembled that of a vulture, a pale blue eye with a film over it. Whenever it fell upon me, my blood ran cold, and so, by degrees, very gradually, I made up my mind to take the life of the old man, and thus rid myself of the eye forever. Now this was the point. You fancy me mad. Madmen know nothing. But you should have seen me. You should have seen how wisely I proceeded, with what caution, with what foresight, with what dissimulation I went to work. Where am I? I was never kinder to the old man than during the whole week before I killed him. And every night, about midnight, I turned the latch of his door and opened it, oh, so gently. And then, when I had made an opening sufficient for my head, I put in a dark lantern, all closed, so that no light shone out, and then I thrust in my head. Oh, you would have laughed to see how cunningly I thrust it in. I moved slowly, very, very slowly, so that I might not disturb the old man's sleep. It took me an hour to place my whole head within the opening so far that I could see him as he lay upon his bed. Ha! Would a madman have been so wise as this? And then, when my head was well in the room, I undid the lantern cautiously. Oh, so cautiously, for the hinges creaked. I undid it just so much that a single thin ray fell upon the vulture eye. And I did this for 7 long nights, every night, just at midnight. But I found the eye was always closed, and so it was impossible to do the work. For it was not the old man who vexed me, but his evil eye. And every morning when the day broke, I went boldly into the chamber and spoke courageously to him, calling him by name in a hearty tone, and inquiring how he had passed the night. So you see, he would have been a very profound old man, indeed, to suspect that every night, just at 12, I looked in upon him while he slept. Upon the 8th night, I was more than usually cautious, opening the door. A watch's minute hand moves more quickly than did mine. Never before that night I had felt the extent of my own power, of my sagacity, I think. Sagacity? I couldn't say. That's one of the few words I've never read before. Interesting. I could scarcely contain my feelings of triumph, to think that there I was, opening the door little by little, and not even a dream of my, and he had not even to dream of my secret deeds or thoughts. I fairly chuckled at the idea, and perhaps he heard me, for he moved on the bed suddenly, as if startled. Now you may think that I drew back, but no. His room was as black as pitch, with a thick darkness, for the shutters were fastened through fear of robbers. And so I knew that he could not see the opening of the door, and I kept pushing it on steadily and steadily. I had my head in, and I was about to open the lantern when my thumb slipped on the tin fastening, and the old man sprang up in the bed, crying out, "Who's there?" I kept quite still and said nothing. For a whole hour I did not move a muscle, and in the meantime I did not hear him lie down. He was still sitting up in the bed listening, just as I have done, night after night, hearkening to the death watches in the wall. Presently I heard a slight groan, and I knew it was the groan of mortal terror. It was not a groan of pain or of grief. Oh, no! It was the low, stifled sound that arises from the bottom of the soul when overcharged with awe. I knew the sound well. Many a night just at midnight, when all the world slept, it has welled up from my own bosom, deepening with its dreadful echo terrors that distracted me. I say I knew it well. I knew what the old man felt and pitied him. Although I chuckled at heart, I knew that he had been lying awake ever since the first slight noise, when he had turned in the bed. His fears had been ever growing upon him. He had been trying to fancy them causeless, but could not. He had been saying to himself, "It is nothing but the wind in the chimney. It is only a mouse crossing the floor," or "It is merely a cricket which has made a single chirp." Yes, he has been trying to comfort himself with all these suppositions, but he had found all in vain. All in vain. Because death, in approaching him, had stalked with his black shadow before him and enveloped the victim, and it was the mournful influence of the unperceived shadow that caused him to feel, although he neither saw nor heard, to feel the presence of my head within the room. When I had waited a long time, very patiently, without hearing him lie down, I resolved to open a little, very little crevice in the lantern. So I opened it. You cannot imagine how stealthily, until, at length, a single dim ray, like the spread of a spider, shot from the crevice and full upon the vulture eye. It was open, wide open, and I grew furious as I gazed upon it. I saw it with perfect distinctness, all a dull blue with a hideous veil over it that chilled the very marrow in my bones. But I could see nothing else of the old man's face or person, for I had directed the ray as if by instinct precisely upon the damned spot. And now have I not told you that what you mistake for madness is but over-acuteness of the senses? Now I say there came to my ears a low, dull, quick sound, such as a watch makes when it enveloped in cotton. I knew that sound well, too. It was the beating of the old man's heart. It increased my fury, as if the beating of the drum stimulates a soldier into courage. But even yet, I refrained and kept still. I scarcely breathed. I held the lantern motionless. I tried how steadily I could maintain the ray upon the eye. Meanwhile, the hellish tattoo in the heart of the heart increased. It grew quicker and quicker and louder every instant. The old man's terror must have been extreme. It grew louder, I say louder every moment. Do you mark me well? I have told you that I am nervous, so I am. And now that the dead hour of the night, amidst the dreadful silence of that old house, so strange a noise as this excited me to uncontrollable terror. Yet for some minutes longer I refrained and stood still. But the beating grew louder and louder. I thought the heart must burst. And now a new anxiety seized me. The sound would be heard by a neighbor. The old man's hour had come. With a loud yell, I threw open the lantern and leaped into the room. He shrieked once only. In an instant, I dragged him to the floor and pulled the heavy bed over him. I then smiled gaily to find the deed so far done. But for many minutes, the heart beat on with a muffled sound. This, however, did not vex me, as it would not be heard through the wall. At length it ceased. The old man was dead. I removed the bed and examined the corpse. Yes, he was stone dead. I placed my hand upon the heart and held it there for many minutes. There was no pulsation. He was stone dead. His eye would trouble me no more. If you still think me mad, you will think so no longer when I describe the wise precautions I took for the concealment of the body. The night waned and I worked hastily, but in silence. First of all, oh my god, okay, grotesque, get ready. First of all, I dismembered the corpse. I cut off the head, the arms, and the legs. Then I took up 3 planks from the flooring of the chamber and deposited all between the scantlings. I then replaced the boards so cleverly, so cunningly, that no human eye, not even his, could have detected anything wrong. There was nothing to wash out, no stain of any kind, no blood spot whatsoever. I had been too wary for that. A tub had caught it all. When I made an end of these labors, it was 4 o'clock, still dark as midnight. As the bell sounded in the hour, there came a knocking at the street door. I went down to open it with a light heart, for what had I now to fear? There entered 3 men who introduced themselves with perfect suavity as officers of the police. A shriek had been heard by the neighbor during the night. Suspicions of foul play had been aroused. Information had been lodged at the police office, and they, the officers, had been deputized to search the premises. I smiled, for what did I have to fear? I bade the gentleman welcome. The shriek, I had said, was my own in a dream. The old man, I mentioned, was absent in the country. I took my visitors all over the house. I bade them search well. I led them at length to his chamber. I showed them his treasures, secure, undisturbed. In the enthusiasm of my confidence, I brought the chairs into the room, and desired them here to rest from their fatigues, while I myself, in the wild audacity of my perfect triumph, placed my own seat upon the very spot beneath which reposed the corpse of the victim. The officers were satisfied. My manner had convinced them. I was singularly at ease. They sat, and while I answered cheerily, they chatted familiar things, but ere long I felt myself getting pale and wished them gone. My head ached. I fancied ringing in my ears, but still they sat and chatted. The ringing became more distinct. It became more distinct. I talked more freely to get rid of the feeling, but it continued and gained definitiveness until at length I found that the noise was not within my ears. No doubt now I grew very pale, but I talked more fluently with a heightened voice. Yet the sound increased, and what could I do? It was a low, dull, quick sound, much a sound as the watchmakers when enveloped in cotton. I gasped for breath, and yet the officers heard it not. I talked more quickly, more vehemently, but the noise steadily increased. I rose and argued about trifles, in a high key and a violent gestures, but the noise steadily increased. I arose. Why would they not be gone? I paced the floor to and fro with heavy strides, and as if excited to fury by the observation of the men, but the noise steadily increased. Oh my God, what could I do? I foamed, I raved, I swore, I swung the chair which I had been sitting and grated it upon the boards, but the noise arose all over and continually increased. It grew louder and louder and louder, and still the men chatted pleasantly and smiled. Was it possible they heard not? Almighty God, no, they heard. They suspected, they knew. They were making a mockery of my horror. This I thought, and this I think. But anything was better than this agony. Anything was more tolerable than this derision. I could bear those hypocritical smiles no longer, and I felt that I must scream or die. And now, again, hark! Louder, louder, louder! Villains! I shrieked. Dissemble no more! I admit the deed! Tear up the planks! Here! Here! It is the beating of his hideous heart! Whew. Thank you. The end. Oh. Whew. I need a break. Yeah. A murder. Being confronted with his own guilt. Oh, okay. I forget how much I get into it when I can visualize it that well. The next song? The next story by Edgar Allan Poe features quite extensive descriptives, and unfortunately I do have to make 3 disclaimers. It is murder most foul, grotesque, visualization, and animal abuse. Viewer discretion is advised as we continue our horror night with The Black Cat. Yes, but don't worry. 1, the VOD will be here. And 2, we have many more stories to get through. Fret not. Everybody's heard of this one in some way, shape, or form. It's very much influenced a lot of... In fact, what is it? I feel like it influenced the Columbo episode at some point. So yes, this one will be grotesque. I'm gonna have trouble getting through this one, I'm sure. Yeah. I like not having the reverb on. You only read 2 of Edgar's poems? Ah, okay, fair enough. Surprisingly, I've only read a couple, but I've only had a accessible book for some time. Right, here we go. For the most wild, yet most homely narrative, which I am about to pen, I neither expect nor solicit belief. Mad indeed I would be to expect it, in a case where my very senses reject their own evidence. Yet mad I am not, and very surely do I not dream. But tomorrow I die, and today I would unburden my soul. My immediate purpose is to place before the world plainly, succinctly, and without comment, a series of mere household events. In their consequences, these events have terrified, have tortured, have destroyed me. Yet I will not attempt to expound them. To me, they have presented little but horror, To many they will seem less terrible than baroques. Hereafter, perhaps, some intellect may be found which will reduce my phantasm to the commonplace. Some intellect more calm, more logical, far less excitable than my own, which will perceive in the circumstances I detail with awe nothing more than ordinary succession of very natural causes and effects. Yeah, right. From my own infancy, I was noted for the docility and humanity of my disposition. My tenderness of my heart was even so conspicuous as to make me jest of my companions. I was especially fond of animals, and indulged by my parent with a great variety of pets. With these I spent most of my time, and never was so happy when feeding and caressing them. This peculiarity of character grew with my growth, and in my manhood I derived from it one of my principal sources of pleasure. To those who have cherished an affection for a faithful and sagacious dog, I need hardly be at the trouble of explaining the nature of the intensity of the gratification thus derivable. There is something in the unselfish and self-sacrificing love of a brute, which goes directly to the heart of him who has had frequent occasion to test the paltry friendship and gossamer fidelity of mere man. I married early, and was happy to find my wife a disposition not uncongenial with my own. That means they were compatible, by the way. Observing my partiality for domestic pets, she lost no opportunity with procuring those of most agreeable kind. We had birds, goldfish, a fine dog, rabbits, a small monkey, and a cat. This latter was a remarkably large and beautiful animal, entirely black and sagacious to an astounding degree. Thank you, Dad. Let's see, where was I? Astounding degree. In speaking of his intelligence, my wife, who at heart was not little tinctured with my superstition, made frequent allusion to the ancient popular notion, which regarded all black cats as witches in disguise. Not that she was ever serious upon the point, and I mentioned that the matter at all for no better reason than that it happens just now to be remembered. Pluto, this was the cat's name, was my favorite pet and playmate. I alone fed him, and he attended me wherever I went about the house. It was even with difficulty that I could prevent him from following me throughout the streets. Our friendship lasted in this manner for several years, during which my general temperament and character, through the instrumentality of the fiend intemperance, had, I blush to confess it, experienced a radical alteration for the worse. I grew day by day more moody, more irritable, more regardless of the feelings of others. I suffered myself to use intemperate language to my wife. At length, I even offered her personal violence. My pets, of course, were made to feel the change in my disposition. I not only neglected, but ill-used them. For Pluto, however, I still retained sufficient regard to restrain me from maltreating him, as I made no scruple of maltreating the rabbits, the monkey, or even the dog, when by accident or through affection they came in my way. But my disease grew upon me, for what disease is like alcohol? And at length even Pluto, who was now becoming old and consequently more peevish, even Pluto began to experience the effects of my ill temper. Alright. This is going to be a tough one to read. But I will do so with criminal professionality. I love cats. I have many cats, and it pains me to read this next section. One night, returning home much intoxicated from one of my haunts about town, I fancied that the cat avoided my presence. I seized him when, in his fright, in my violence, he inflicted a slight wound upon my hand with his teeth. The fury of a demon instantly possessed me. I knew myself no longer. My original soul seemed at once to take its flight from my body, and more than a fiendish malevolence, Jinn nurture thrilled every fiber of my frame. I took from my waistcoat pocket a penknife, opened it, grasped the poor beast in by the throat, and deliberately cut out one of its eyes from the socket. Oh, God. I blush, I burn, I shudder while I pen the damnable atrocity. When the reason returned with the morning, when I had slept off the fumes of the night's debauch, I experienced a sentimental half of horror. A sentiment half of horror, half of remorse for the crime which I had been guilty. But it was at best a feeble and equivocal feeling, and the soul remained untouched. I again plunged into excess, and I soon drowned all in wine all memory of the deed. In the meantime, the cat slowly recovered. The socket of the eye presented, it is true, a frightening appearance, but he no longer appeared to suffer any pain. He went about the house as usual, but as might be expected, he fled in extreme terror on my approach. I had so much of my old heart left as to be at first grieved by the evident dislike on the part of the creature which had once so loved me. But this feeling soon gave place to irritation, and then, as if to... Let's see, there we go. I lost my place for a second there. But this feeling soon gave place to irritation, and then came, as if to my final and irrevocable overthrow, the spirit of perverseness. Of this spirit, philosophy takes no account, yet I am not more sure that any soul lives, that I am that perverseness. What the Hold on. Let my brain cool off a bit. What the hell? Okay. Of the spirit, philosophy takes no account. Yet I am not more sure that my soul lives than I am that perverseness. It one of the positive impulses of the human heart, primitive impulses of the human heart. One of the indivisible primary faculties or sentiments which give direction to the character of man, who has not 100 times found himself committing a vile or stupid action, for no other reason than because he knows he should not. Have we not a perpetual inclination in the teeth of our best judgment to violate that which is law, merely because we understand it to be such? This spirit of perverseness, I say, came to my final overthrow. It was this unfathomable longing of the soul to fix itself, to offer violence to its own nature, to do wrong for the wrong's sake only, that urged me to continue, and finally consummate the injury that I had inflicted upon the unoffending brute. One morning, in cold blood, I slipped a noose about its neck and hung it to the limb of a tree. Hung it with the tears streaming from my eyes and the bitterest remorse in my heart. Hung it because I knew that it had loved me, and because I had felt it had given me no reason of offense. Hung it because I knew that in so doing I was committing a sin. A deadly sin that would go on to jeopardize my immortal soul, as to place it, if such a thing were possible, even beyond the reach of the most infinite mercy of the most merciful and most terrible God. Poor Pluto. Yeah. On the night of the day on which this most cruel deed was done, I was aroused from sleep by the cry of fire. The curtains of my bed were in flames. My whole house was blazing. It was with great difficulty that my wife, a servant, and myself made our escape from the conflagration. The destruction was complete. My entire worldly wealth was swallowed up, and I resigned myself thenceforward to despair. Yeah, karma, basically. I'll keep reading. I am above the weakness of seeking to establish a sequence of cause and effect between the disaster and the atrocity. But I am detailing a chain of facts and wish not to leave even a possible link imperfect. On the day succeeding the fire, I visited the ruins. The walls, with one exception, had fallen in. This exception was found in a compartment wall, not very thick, which stood about the middle of the house, and against which had rested the head of my bed. The plastering had here, in great measure, resisted the action of the fire, a fact which I attributed to its having been recently spread. About this wall a dense crowd were collected, and many persons seemed to be examining a particular portion of it with very minute and eager attention. The words "strange" and "singular" and other similar expressions excited my curiosity. I approached and saw, as if graven in bas relief upon the white surface, the figure of a gigantic cat. The impression was given with an accuracy truly marvelous, and there was a rope about the animal's neck. When I first beheld this apparition, for I could scarcely regard it as less, my wonder and my terror were extreme. But at length reflection came to my aid. The cat, I remembered, had been hung in a garden adjacent to the house. Upon alarm of the fire, the garden had been immediately filled up by the crowd, by someone of whom the animal must have been cut from the tree and thrown through an open window into my chamber. This had probably been done with a view of arousing me from the sleep. The falling of the other walls, which had compressed the victim of my cruelty into the substance of the freshly spread plaster, the lime of which, the flames, and the ammonia from the carcass had been accomplished in the portraiture as I saw it. All makes sense, yeah, totally. Although I thus readily accounted this to my reason, if not altogether to my conscience, for the startling fact that detailed, it did not the less fail to make a deep impression upon my fancy. For months, I could not rid myself of the phantasm of the cat, and during this period there came back into my spirit a half-sentiment that seemed, but was not, remorse. I went so far as to regret the loss of an animal, and to look about me among the vile haunts which I now habitually frequented for another pet of the same species and of somewhat similar appearance, with which to supply its place. One night, as I sat, half stupefied, in the den of more than infamy, my attention was suddenly drawn to some black object reposing upon the head of one of the immense hogsheads of gin, or of rum, which constituted the chief furniture of the apartment. I had been looking steadily at the top of this hogshead for some minutes, and what now caused me surprise was the fact that I had not sooner perceived the object thereupon. I approached it, and touched it with my hand. It was a black cat, a very large one, fully as large as Pluto, and closely resembling him in every respect but one. Pluto had not a white hair upon any portion of his body, but this cat had a large, although indefinite splotch of white, covering nearly the whole region of the breast. Ah, tuxedo cat, cool. I am concerned for this cat now. Upon touching him, he immediately arose, purred loudly, rubbed against my hand, and appeared delighted with my notice. This, then, was the very creature of which I was in search. I had once offered to purchase it of the landlord, but this person made no claim to it, knew nothing of it, and had never seen it before. I continued my caresses, and when I prepared to go home, the animal evinced a disposition to accompany me. I hate this story too, but it's spooky night. I continued my caresses. When I prepared to go home, the animal evinced a disposition to accompany me. I permitted it to do so, occasionally stooping and patting it as I proceeded. When it reached my house, it was domesticated itself at once, and became immediately a great favor with my wife. For my own part, I soon found a dislike to it arising within me. This was just the reverse of what I anticipated, but I know not how or why it was. Its evident fondness for me rather disgusted and annoyed me. By slow degrees, these feelings of disgust and annoyance rose into bitterness of hatred. I avoided the creature. A certain sense of shame and the remembrance of my former deed of cruelty preventing me from physically abusing it. I did not, for some weeks, strike or otherwise violently ill-use it, but gradually, very gradually, I came to look upon it with unutterable loathing, and to flee silently from its odious presence as if from the breath of pestilence. What added no doubt to my hatred of the beast was the discovery on the morning after I brought it home that, like Pluto, it had also been deprived of one of its eyes. This circumstance, however, only endeared it to my wife, who, as I have already said, possessed in high degree that humanity of feeling which had once been my distinguishing trait and the source of many of my simplest and purest pleasures. Welcome, welcome, y'all. We're in the middle of reading The Black Cat by Edgar Allan Poe. I will be focusing on reading for the most part, so hopefully y'all just enjoy your time here. Let's see, where were we? To catch you up very quickly, we are reading the tale of the Black Cat as narrated by a man who is slowly going mad from his own grief of killing a cat. A family cat. Your discretion is advised. There is grotesque descriptions and animal abuse. But it is a story nonetheless. And we are here to be terrified. Continuing on. Okay. Let's see. With my aversion to this cat, however, its partiality for myself seemed to increase. It followed my footsteps with a personality which it would be difficult to make the reader comprehend. Whenever I sat, it would crouch beneath my chair, or spring upon my knees, covering me with its loathsome caresses. If I arose to walk, it would get between my legs and thus nearly throw me down, or fastening its long sharp claws at my dress, clamber in this manner to my breast. At such times, although I longed to destroy it with a blow, I was yet withheld from doing so, partly by the memory of my former crime, but chiefly, let me confess at once, by the absolute dread of the beast. This dread was not exactly a dread of physical evil, and yet I should be at a loss how otherwise to define it. I am almost ashamed to own, yes, even in this felon's cell, I am almost ashamed to own that the terror and horror with which the animal inspired me had been heightened by one of the merest chimeras it would be possible to conceive. My wife had called my attention more than once to the character of the mark of the white hair of which I have spoken, and which constituted the sole visible difference between the strange beast and the one I had destroyed. The reader will remember that this mark, although large, had been originally very indefinite, but by slow degrees nearly imperceptible, and which for a long time my reason struggled to reject it as fanciful. It had at length assumed a rigorous distinctness of outline, It was now the representation of an object I shudder to name. And for this, above all, I loathed and dreaded, and would have to rid myself of the monster had I dared. It was now, I say, the image of a hideous, of a ghastly thing, of the gallows, oh, mournful and terrible engine of horror and crime, of agony and death. And now I was indeed wretched beyond the wretchedness of mere humanity, and a brute beast whose fellow I had contemptuously destroyed, a brute beast to work out for me, a man fashioned in the image of the high God, so much of insufferable woe. Alas, neither by day nor by night knew I the blessing of rest any more. During the former, the creature left me no moment alone, and in the latter I started hourly from dreams of unutterable fear to find the hot breath of that thing upon my face, and its vast weight, an incarnate nightmare that I have no power to shake off, incumbent eternally on my heart. Beneath the pressures of torment, such as these, the feeble remnant of the good within me succumbed. Evil thoughts became my sole intimates, the darkest and most evil of thoughts. The moodiness of my usual temper increased to hatred of all things and of all mankind, while from the sudden infrequent... let yourself in. Excuse me. The moodiness of my usual temper increased to the hatred of all things and of all mankind, while from sudden, frequent, and ungovernable outbursts of fury, to which I now blindly abandoned myself, my uncomplaining wife, alas, was the most usual and most patient of sufferers. One day, she accompanied me upon some household errand into the cellar of the old building which our poverty compelled us to inhabit. The cat followed me down the steep stairs, and nearly throwing me headlong, exacerbated me to madness. Uplifting an axe, and forgetting in my wrath the childish dread which had hitherto stayed my hand, I aimed a blow at the animal, which, of course, would have proved instantly fatal had it descended as I wish. But this blow was arrested by the hand of my wife. Goaded by the interference into a rage more than demoniacal, I withdrew my arm from the grasp and buried the axe in her brain. She fell dead upon the spot without a groan. I love the reactions by chat. They can just hear and see and feel everything. Dear God, this is working out better than I thought. The hideous murder accomplished, I set myself forthwith, with entire deliberation, to the task of concealing the body. I knew that I could not remove it from the house, either by day or by night, without the risk of being observed by the neighbors. Many projects have entered my mind. At one period I thought of cutting the corpse into minute fragments and destroying them by fire. Another, I resolved to dig a grave for it in the floor of the ceiling of the cellar. And again, I deliberated about casting it into the well in the yard, about packing it in a box as if merchandise without the usual arrangements, and so getting a porter to take it from my house. Finally, I hit upon what I considered a far better expedient than either of these. I determined to wall it up in the cellar, as the monks of the Middle Ages are recorded to have walled up their victims. For a purpose such as the cellar was well adapted, its walls were loosely constructed, and had lately been plastered throughout with a rough plaster, which the dampness of the atmosphere had prevented the hardening. Moreover, in one of the walls was a projection, caused by a false chimney or fireplace that had been filled up and made to resemble the rest of the cellar. I made no doubt that I could readily displace the bricks at this point, insert the corpse, and the whole up, as if before, so that no eye could detect anything suspicious. And in this calculation I was not deceived. By means of a crowbar, I easily dislodged the bricks, and having carefully deposited the body against the inner wall, I propped it in that position. While, with little trouble, had I relaid the whole structure as it originally stood. Having procured mortar, sand, and hair, with every possible precaution, I prepared a plaster which could not be distinguished from the old, and with this I very carefully went over the new brickwork. When I had finished, I felt satisfied that all was right. The wall did not present the slightest appearance of having been disturbed. The rubbish on the floor was picked up with the minutest care, and I looked around triumphantly and said to myself, "Here, at least, then, my labor has not been in vain." My next step was to look for the beast which had been the cause of so much wretchedness, for I had at length firmly resolved to put it to death. Had I been able to meet with it at that moment, there could have been no doubt of its fate. But it appeared that the crafty animal had been alarmed at the violence of my previous anger, and forbore to present itself in my present mood. It is impossible to describe or to imagine the blissful sense of relief which the absence of the detested creature occasioned in my bosom. It did not make its appearance during the night, and thus for one night, at least, since its introduction into the house, I soundly and tranquilly slept. I slept even with the burdens of murder upon my soul. The second and third day passed, and still my tormentor came not. Once again I breathed as if a free man. The monster in terror had fled the premises forever. I should behold it no more. My happiness was supreme. The guilt of my dark deed disturbed me but little. Some few inquiries had been made, but these had been readily answered. Even a search had been instituted, but of course nothing was to be discovered. I looked upon my future felicity as secured. Upon the fourth day of my assassination, a party of police came very unexpectedly into the house, and proceeded to make rigorous investigation of the premises. Secure, however, in the inscrutability of my place of concealment, I felt no embarrassment whatsoever. The officers bade me accompany them in their search, and they left no nook and no corner unexplored. At length, for the third or fourth time, they descended into the cellar. I quivered not a muscle. My heart beat calmly as that of the one who slumbers in innocence. I walked the cellar from end to end. I folded my arms upon my bosom, and I roamed easily to and fro. The police were thoroughly satisfied and prepared to depart. The glee in my heart was too strong to be restrained. I burned to say that, if but one word by triumph... Excuse me, let me try again. I burned to say, if but one word by way of triumph, and to render doubly sure their assurance of my guiltlessness. "Gentlemen," I said at last, as the party ascended the steps, "I delight you to have allayed your suspicions. I wish you all health and a little more courtesy. By the by, gentlemen, this is a very well-constructed house." In the rapid desire to say something easily, I scarcely knew what I uttered at all. I must say, excellently well-constructed house. These walls... Where are you going, gentlemen? These walls are solidly put together. And here, through the mere frenzy of bravado, I rapped heavily with a cane, which I held my hand upon that very portion of the brickwork behind which stood the corpse of my wife in my bosom. But may God shield me and deliver me from the fangs of my arch-fiend. No sooner had the reverberations of my blows sunk into silence than I was answered by a voice from within the tomb. A cry, at first muffled, and then broken, like the sobbing of a child, and then quickly swelling into one long, loud, and continuous scream, utterly anomalous and inhuman, a howl, a wailing of shriek. half horror and half triumph, as if might have arisen only out of hell, conjointly from the throats of the damned in their agony, and of the demons that exult in the damnation. Of my own thoughts it is folly to speak. Swooning, I staggered on to the opposite wall. For one instant, the party on the stairs remained motionless through the extremity of terror and awe. In the next, a dozen stout arms were toiling at the wall. It fell bodily. The corpse, already greatly decayed and clotted with gore, stood erect before the eyes of the spectators. Upon its head, with red, extended mouth, and the solitary eye of fire, sat the hideous beast whose craft had seduced me into murder, and whose informing voice had consigned me to the hangman. I had walled the monster up within the tomb. The end. That was a lot to get through. I hope I'm not just sounding insane and I'm actually making some coherent sense. Like, I know me, and sometimes I get a little mincy with my words. God, that one got me good. Thank you. Okay. Sorry. Good grief. Thanks for listening in, Dad. Okay. There is another one. We'll take a small break so I can let my voice rest. Yeah, it's 10:30. Wow. He stayed up and missed the news for me. Oh, that's sweet. Alright, let me take a quick break. Shake things out. Hopefully y'all ain't got the willies too bad. We have been through 3. We have been through Teeny Tiny and the Witch Woman, which had voice acting. We have read The Telltale Heart, and you stepped in halfway through The Black Cat. The only thing you fear is immortality. Cool. Okay. All right. Who's my favorite PvZ plant? Never played. Couldn't tell you. I would like to mention that for those who do have social medias, I'm currently wearing a suit. You can't see it under this cloak, but I am in fact very, very goth at the moment. Hope the storytelling will not strain your voice too bad. No, not at all. Especially because I'm using my normal voice. At the beginning, it was pretty dicey using my inverted voice, but now I'm fine. I'll be fine. And anyway, so about the suit, I posted some photos actually of my little horror show host getup on Twitter and on Instagram. They're the same idea, separate photos. So, Mimsy, you asked last time if I'm photogenic. Well, you can be the judge of that. It doesn't include my face, obviously, but I know how to dress, at the very least. Is there anything else I wanted to discuss? I'm very warm at the moment, because this is a lot of clothing to have and no AC. Oh dear. Alright. Goth Maid Ricky went. Don't give Phantom any ideas. Okay. I'm sweltering here, and this headset is getting a little warm, so let's keep going. I'm going to go ahead and turn on the AC. There might be a small humming. Yeah, she's not watching, obviously. She is at a concert right now, as far as I can tell. Gonna go ahead. I know what I can do. Okay. Maybe I should turn down the fire a bit, yeah? Whatever. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Yeah. The little skull pendant. The little skull necklace really solidifies it together. I'm glad I picked it up. It was a nice find from a geek convention. Alright. Moving on. Alright. The next Edgar Allan Poe story has to do with death en masse. It is pandemic-ish, so for those of you who are veterans of the past 2 years, this may be uncomfortable, but it is not of plague and pestilence. Rather, it is of being oblivious to it. This is The Masque of the Red Death by Edgar Allan Poe. There we go. And I will be using my very special voice and reverb yet again. So I will do my best, because Nannerman did say that it was kind of loud and screechy. I'll face away from the microphone as best I can when I do it. To set the scene, this is probably Europe, sometime 600 or something. I don't know when the plague was, actually. The Red Death had long devastated the country. No pestilence had ever been so fatal or so hideous. Blood was its avatar, and it sealed the redness and honor of blood. And the honor of blood. There were sharp pains and sudden dizziness, the profuse bleeding at the pores with dissolution, the scarlet stains upon the body, and especially upon the face of the victim, with a pest ban which shut them out from the aid and from the sympathy of his fellow men. And the whole seizure, progress, and termination of the disease were the incidents of half an hour. But the Prince Prospero was happy, and dauntless and sagacious. When his dominions were half depopulated, he summoned to his presence 1,000 hale and light-hearted friends from amongst the knights and dames of his court, and with these retired to the deep seclusions of one of his castelled abbeys. This was an extensive and magnificent structure, the creation of the prince's own eccentric yet august taste. A strong and lofty wall girdled it in. The wall had gates of iron, the courtiers having entered, brought furnaces and massy hammers, and welded the bolts. They resolved to leave means neither of ingress nor egress to the sudden impulses of despair or of frenzy from within. And this means that we're just going to party hard and wait out the plague. Sound familiar? The external world would take care of itself. In the meantime, it was folly to grieve or to think. The prince had provided all of the appliances of pleasure. There were buffoons, there were improvisatory, and there were ballet dancers, there were musicians, there was beauty, there was wine. All these and security were within. Without was the Red Death. It was towards the close of the 5th or 6th month of his seclusion, and while the pestilence raged on most furiously abroad, that the Prince Prospero entertained his 1,000 friends at a masked ball of the most unusual magnificence. It was a voluptuous scene, that masquerade. But first, let me tell you of the rooms in which it was held. There was 7. An imperial suite. In many palaces, however, such suites form a long and straight vista, while the folding doors that slide back nearly to the walls on each. Whoa. Okay, my brain's going crazy. Give me a sec. I can't read for some reason. Okay, I'm good. I'm just kind of reading and not thinking. My bad. Prince Prospero, it was a voluptuous scene. In many palaces, however, such suites form a long and straight vista, while the folding doors slide back nearly to the walls on either hand, so that the view of the whole extent is scarcely impeded. Here the case was very different, as might have been expected from the Duke's love of the bizarre. The apartments were so irregularly disposed that the vision embraced but little more than one at a time. There was a sharp turn at every 20 or 30 yards, and at each turn a novel effect. To the right and left, in the middle of each wall, a tall and narrow Gothic window looked out upon a closed corridor which pursued the windings of the suite. These windows were of stained glass, whose color varied in accordance with the prevailing hue of the decorations of the chamber into which it opened. That at the eastern extremity was hung, for example, in blue and vividly blue. Were its windows. Wow. Where did my brain go for a second there? Okay, let me try again. These windows were of stained glass, whose color varied in accordance with the prevailing hue of the decorations of the chamber into which it opened. That of the eastern extremity was hung, for example, in blue, and vividly blue were its windows. The second chamber was purple in its ornaments and tapestries, and here the panes were purple. The third was green throughout, and so were the casements. The fourth was furnished and lighted with orange. The fifth was with white, the sixth with violet. The seventh apartment was closely shrouded in black velvet tapestries that hung all over the ceiling and down the walls, falling in heavy folds upon a carpet of the same material and hue. But in this chamber only, the color of the windows failed to correspond with the decorations. The panes here were scarlet, a deep blood color. Now, no one in the 7 apartments was there. Now, in no one of the 7 apartments there was any lamp or candelabrum. Amid the profusion of golden ornaments that lay scattered to and fro or depended from the roof, there was no light of any kind emanating from a lamp or candle within the suite of chambers. But in the corridors that followed the suite, there stood, opposite to each window, a heavy tripod bearing a brazier of fire that projected rays through the tinted glass and so glaringly illuminated the room. And thus there were produced a multitude of gaudy and fantastic appearances. But in the western or black chamber, the effect of the firelight that streamed upon the dark hangings throughout the blood-tinted panes was ghastly in the extreme, and produced so wild a look upon the countenance of those who entered, that there were few in the company bold enough to set foot within its precincts at all. Man, this one's really stumbling. Let me take a drink of water. You know, maybe when I took that break I should have taken my headphones off. Let my brain breathe a bit. It could be that my mouth is getting tired. That could be it. I mean, I did do a lot of reading yesterday, and now I'm doing a lot of reading tonight. I'll be fine. Just wish I had a bit better light. This fireplace is dim at best. Okay, let's continue. E equals mc square x and 2 multiplied by solve for 7. Oh wait, I'm reading the actual book, my bad. It was in this apartment also that there stood against the western wall a gigantic clock of ebony. Its pendulum swung to and fro with a dull, heavy, monotonous clang, and when the minute hand made the circuit of the face, and the hour was to be stricken, there came from the brazen lungs of a clock a sound which was clear and loud and deep and exceedingly musical, but of so peculiar a note and emphasis that, at each lapse of an hour, the musicians of the orchestra were constrained to pause, momentarily in their performance, to hearken to the sound, and thus the waltzers perforce ceased their evolutions, and there was a brief disconcert of the whole gay company, and while the chimes of the clock yet rung, it was observed that the giddiest grew pale, and the more aged and sedate passed their hands over their brows, as if in a confused reverie or meditation. But when the echoes had fully ceased, a light laughter at once pervaded the assembly. The musicians looked at each other and smiled as if their own nervousness and folly at their... Oh, wait. Ah, God, I've skipped over words yet again. Whew, okay. But when the echoes had fully ceased, a light laughter at once pervaded the assembly. The musicians looked at each other and smiled as if at their own nervousness and folly, and made whispering vows each to each other that the next chiming of the clock should produce in them no similar emotion. And then, after a lapse of 60 minutes, which embraced 3,600 seconds of the time that flies, there came yet another chiming of the clock, and then were the same disconcert and tremendousness and meditation as before. Try fist fighting the words. Yeah, that only hurt my thumb. Thanks. But in spite of these things, it was a gay and magnificent revel. The tastes of the Duke were peculiar. He had a fine eye for colors and effects. He disregarded the decora of mere fashion. His plans were bold and fiery, and his conceptions glowed with barbaric luster. There were some who would have thought him mad. His followers felt he was not. It was necessary to hear and see and touch him to be sure that he was not. And be careful with that. Literature is important. Amen. Don't worry, it's a brand new copy, so it has not seen the woes of time just yet. He had directed in great part the movable embellishments of the 7 chambers, upon occasion of this great fete, and it was his own guiding taste which had given character to the masquerades. Be sure they were grotesque, but there were much glare and glitter and piquance and phantasm, much of what has been since seen in Hernani. There were arabesque figures with unsuited limbs and appointments. There were delirious fancies such as the madman fashions. There were much of the beautiful, much of the wanton, much of the bizarre, something of the terrible, and not a little that which might have excited disgust. To and fro in the 7 chambers there stalked, in fact, a multitude of dreams, and these the dreams writhed in and out, taking hue from the rooms, causing the wild music of the orchestra to seem as the echo of their steps. And anon there strikes the ebony clock, which stands in the hall of velvet, and then for a moment all is still, and all is silent save for the voice of the clock. The dreams are stiff frozen as they stand, but the echoes of the chime die away, They have endured but an instant, and a light, half-subdued laughter floats after them as they depart. And now again the music swells, and the dreams live and writhe to and fro more merrily than ever, taking hue from the many tinted windows through which stream the rays from the tripods. But to the chamber which lies the most westwardly of the seven, there are now none of the maskers who venture, for the night is waning away, and there flows a ruddier light through the blood-colored panes, and the blackness of the sable drapery appalls. And to him whose foot falls upon the sable carpet, there comes from the near clock of ebony a muffled peal more solemnly and pathetic than any which reaches their ears, who indulge in the more remote gaieties of the other apartments. I feel like I am reading an encyclopedia. It's like having to read and translate at the same time. I know not where I should begin or end, and I will continue onward until I get through this. But the other apartments were densely crowded, and in them beat feverishly the heart of life, and the revel went whirling on, until at length there commenced the sounding of midnight upon the clock, and from then the music ceased. And then the music ceased, as I have told, and the evolutions of the waltzers were quieted, and there was an uneasy cessation of all things as before. But now there were 12 strokes to be sounded by the bell of the clock, and thus it happened, perhaps, that more the thought crept, with more of time, into the meditations of the thoughtful among those who revelled. And thus, too, it happened, perhaps, that before the last echoes of the last chime had utterly sunk into silence, there were many individuals in the crowd who had found leisure to become aware of the presence of the masked figure, which had arrested the attention of no single individual before. And the rumor of this new presence having spread itself whisperingly around, there arose at length from the whole company a buzz or murmur expressive of disapprobation, and surprise, then finally of terror, of horror and disgust. In an assembly of phantasms such as I have painted, it may well be supposed that no ordinary appearance could have excited such sensation. In truth, masquerade license of the night was nearly unlimited, but the figure of question had out-Heroded Herod, and gone beyond the bounds of even the prince's indefinite decorum. There are chords in the heart of the most reckless which cannot be touched without emotion, even with the utterly lost, to whom life and death are equally jests. There are matters of which no jest can be made. The whole company, indeed, seemed now deeply to feel that in the costume and bearing... Whoa. Okay, we're good. We lost a little bit of internet so far. We've lost a lot of internet so far. OBS? You good? OBS seems fine. OBS does not seem fine. Okay. If it's fine for you guys, then I shouldn't worry about it. The figure... The whole company, indeed, now seemed deeply to feel that in the costume and bearing of the stranger neither wit nor propriety existed. The figure was tall and gaunt, and shrouded from head to foot in the habiliments of the grave. The mask which concealed the visage was made so nearly to resemble the countenance of a stiffened corpse that the closest scrutiny must have had difficulty in detecting the cheat. And yet all this might have been endured, if not approved, by the mad revellers around. But the mummer had gone so far as to assume the type of the Red Death. His vesture was dabbled in blood, and his broad brow, with all the features of the face, was besprinkled with the scarlet horror. when the eyes of Prince Prospero fell upon this spectral image, which, with a slow and solemn movement, as more fully to sustain his role, stalked to and fro among the waltzers, he was seen to be convulsed in the first moment with a strong shudder, either of terror or distaste, but in the next his brow reddened with rage. "Who dares?" he demanded hoarsely of his courtiers who stood near him. "Who dares insult us with this blasphemous mockery? Seize him and unmask him, that we may know whom we have to hang at sunrise from the battlements." It was in the eastern or blue chamber which stood the Prince Prospero as he uttered these words. They rang throughout the 7 rooms loudly and clearly, for the prince was a bold and robust man, and the music had become hushed at the waving of his hand. It was in the blue room where stood the prince, with a group of pale courtiers by his side. At first, as he spoke, there was a slight rushing of movement as the group in the direction of the intruder, who at the moment was also near at hand, now with deliberate and stately step made closer approach to the speaker. But from a certain nameless awe with which the mad assumptions of the mummer had inspired the whole party, there were found none who put forth a hand to seize him, so that unimpeded he passed within a yard of the prince's person, and while the vast assembly, as if with one impulse, shrank from the corners of the centers of the room to the walls, he made his way uninterruptedly, but with the same solemn and measured step which had distinguished him from the first, through the blue chamber to the purple, through the purple to the green, through the green to the orange, and through this again to the white, even thence to the violet, ere a decided movement had been made to arrest him. It was then, however, that the Prince Prospero, maddening with rage at the shame of his own momentary cowardice, rushed hurriedly through the 6 chambers, while none followed him on account of a deadly terror that had seized upon all. He bore aloft a drawn dagger and had approached in rapid impetuosity? I don't know. To within 3 or 4 feet of the retreating figure, when the latter, having attained the extremity of the velvet apartment, turned suddenly and confronted his pursuer. There was a sharp cry, and the dagger dropped gleaming upon the sable carpet, upon which instantly afterwards fell prostrate in death the Prince Prospero. Then, summoning a wild courage of despair, a throng of the revelers at once threw themselves into the black apartment, and, seizing the mummer, whose tall figure stood erect and motionless within the shadow of the ebony clock, gasped in unutterable horror at finding the grave cerements and corpse-like mask, which they handled with so violent a rudeness, untenanted by any tangible form. And now was acknowledged the presence of the Red Death. He had come like a thief in the night. And once by one dropped the revelers in the blood-bedewed halls of their revel, and died each in despairing posture of his fall, and the life of the ebony clock went out with that of the last of the gay, and the flames of the tripod expired, and the darkness and decay and the Red Death held illimitable dominion over all. My brain is mush. Ooh, that took a lot to get through. That was a lot of world building, is what that was. Okay, let me take a quick break. We're almost done. I'm gonna go ahead and take off my headphones here. Yeah, you can't see, obviously, but I can feel at all times. Hope y'all are enjoying it so far. Oh my goodness. Thank you, Mimsy. Glad to hear, glad to hear. I'm having a weird time not hearing my ultra bassy voice in my own ears right now. Sorry. It's about to be 11, so we will, after a little bit of me getting my brain back together on what's left in this skull of mine, we'll finish off the last of the Edgar Allan Poe poems and move into my own personal story. Yeah, I can feel my lips going a little bit numb from overuse. I now understand why I sometimes slur in my streams, like later on. It's interesting. Okay. Ooh. Yeah, my jaw is actually... My jaw feels looser than usual. Upper jaw, obviously. But it's interesting. Right, okay, give me a second. Whew. Nope. I just have to tough it out. I'm gonna sound Canadian by the end of this, eh? Okay. One more sip. Sorry. Headphones are going on. Alright. We only have a couple more left. Nothing to worry about here. Some interesting residue on the paper. The last two are thankfully short poems. And legitimate, like not stories. So it would be fairly easy to read these aloud. There are two parts to the amazing Edgar Allan Poe. Two parts of this poem. First, we take you to a day of mourning as we look upon the casket of Lenore. Ah, broken is the golden bow, the spirit flown forever. Let the bell toll, a saintly soul floats on the Stygian river. And Guy de Vere, hast thou no tear? Weep now or nevermore. See you on drear and rigid bier, low lies thy love, Lenore. Come, let the burial rite be read, the funeral song be sung, an anthem for the queenless dead that ever died so young. A dirge for her, the doubly dead, that she died so young. Oh, the title. Yep, thank you. Let me fix that up. Thank you, Mimsy. Poem. Very important. Wretches, he loved her for her wealth and hated her for her pride. And when she fell in feeble health, he blessed her that she died. How shall the ritual then be read, the requiem how be sung? By you, by yours, the evil eye, by yours, the slanderous tongue, that did to death the innocence that died, and died so young. Becavimus, but rave not thus, and let a Sabbath song go up to God so solemnly the dead may feel no wrong. The sweet Lenore hath gone before with hope that flew beside, leaving thee wild for the dear child that should have been thy bride. The morning ends. Death passes, and we attempt to forget. But as we've learned with Edgar Allan Poe, death does not leave thee yet. As we finish off Edgar Allan Poe with The Raven. I'm going to try and do my best here, because this is like the penultimate slam poetry that all those kids love to like riff on. For me, it's going to be very important for the next story. And if... screw it, y'all know I actually like and enjoy guns. If Paul Harrow can do it in the middle of a damn forest while holding an AR-15, I can do it here live before you in front of a fake fire. I mean real fire, obviously. Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered weak and weary over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, while I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping, as for someone gently rapping at my chamber door. "'Tis some visitor," I muttered, tapping at my chamber door. Only this, and nothing more. Distinctly I remember it was in the bleak December, and each separate dying ember brought its ghost upon the floor. Eagerly I wished the morrow, vainly I sought to borrow from my books surcease of sorrow for the lost Lenore, for the rare and radiant maiden whom angels name Lenore, nameless here forevermore. And the silken, sad, uncertain rustling of each purple curtain filled me with fantastic terrors never felt before. Oh, and the silken and sad, uncertain rustling of each purple curtain filled me with fantastic terrors never felt before. So that now, to still the beating of my heart, I stood repeating, "'Tis some visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door. Some late visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door. This is it, and nothing more." Presently my soul grew stronger, hesitating then no longer. "Sir," I said, "or madam, truly your forgiveness I implore. But the fact is I was napping, and so gently you came rapping, and faintly you came tapping at my chamber door, that I scarce was sure I heard you. Here I opened wide the door." Nice timing by my roommate. Darkness there, and nothing more. Deep into that darkness peering, I stood there wondering, fearing, doubting, dreaming dreams no mortal ever dared to dream before. But silence was unbroken, and the stillness gave no token, and the only word there spoken was the whispered word, "Lenore." This I whispered, and an echo murmured back the word, "Lenore." Merely this, and nothing more. Back into the chamber turning, all my soul within me burning, soon again I heard a tapping, something louder than before. "Surely," said I, "surely that is something at my window lattice. Let me see then, what thereat is, and this mystery explore. Let my heart be still a moment, and this mystery explore. 'Tis the wind, and nothing more." Open here I flung the shutter, when with many flirt and flutter, then there stepped a stately raven of saintly days of yore. Not the least obscene he, not a minute stayed he, but with the mien of lord or lady, perched above my chamber door. Perched upon a bust of Pallas just above my chamber door. Perched and sat, nothing more. Then this ebony bird beguiling my sad fancy into smiling, by the grave and stern decorum of the countenance it wore. "Though thy crest be shorn and shaven, thou," I said, "art no craven." ghastly grim, an ancient raven, wandering from the nightly shore. Tell me what thy lordly name is on this night's Plutonian shore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Much I marveled this ungainly fowl to hear discourse so plainly, though its answer little meaning, little relevancy bore, for we cannot help agreeing that no living human being ever yet was blessed with seeing bird above his chamber door, bird or beast upon the sculptured bust above his chamber door, with such a name as Nevermore. But the raven, sitting lonely on that placid bust, spoke only that one word, as if his soul in that one word did he outpour. Nothing farther than he uttered, not a feather did he fluttered, till I scarcely more than muttered, other friends have flown before. On the morrow he will leave me, as my hopes have flown before. Then the bird said, nevermore. Startled at the stillness broken by reply so aptly spoken, doubtless, said I, what it utters is only a stock and store, caught from some unhappy master, whom unmerciful disaster followed faster, till his songs one burden bore, till the dirges of his hope that melancholy burden bore, of nevermore. But the raven still beguiling all my sad soul into smiling, straight I wheeled a cushioned seat in front of the bird and bust and door. Then upon the velvet sinking, I betook myself to linking, fancy unto fancy, thinking what this ominous bird of yore, what this grim, ungainly, ghastly, gaunt, and ominous bird of yore, meant in croaking nevermore. This I sat engaged in guessing, but no syllable expressing, to the fowl whose fiery eyes now burned into my bosom's core. This and more I sat divining, with my head at ease of reclining, on the cushion's velvet lining that the lamplight glowed over, but whose violet lining with the lamplight gloating over, she shall press, nevermore. Then methought the air grew denser, perfumed from an unseen censer, swung by seraphim whose footfalls tinkled on the tufted floor. Wretch, I cried, thy God hath lent thee, these angels he hath sent thee, respite, and nepenthe from thy memories of Lenore. Quaff, oh quaff this kind Nepthine, and forget this lost Lenore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still of bird or devil, whether tempter sent or whether tempest tossed thee there ashore, desolate yet all undaunted, on this desert land enchanted, on this home by horror haunted, tell me truly, I implore, is there balm in Gilead? Tell me, I implore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still, if bard or devil, by that heaven that bends above us, by that God that we both adore, tell this soul of sorrow laden within the distance Iden, if shall clasp a Satan maiden whom's the angels name Lenore, clasp a rare and radiant maiden whom the angels name Lenore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Be that word our sign of parting, bird or fiend, I shrieked upstarting. Get thee back into the tempest and the night's Plutonian shore. Leave me no black plume as a token of that lie thy soul has spoken. Leave my loneliness unbroken. Quit the bust above my door. Take thy beak from out my heart, and take thy form from off my door. Quoth the raven, nevermore. And the raven, never flitting, still is sitting, and on the pallid bust of Pallas just above my chamber door, and his eyes have all the seeming of a demon that is dreaming, and the lamplight o'er him streaming throws his shadow on the floor, and my soul from that shadow that lies floating on the floor shall be lifted nevermore. And now we end tonight's minuscule program the end, by the way, with a personal story. One I will share with you as a personal horror story for you to all consider this Halloween. As you gaze upon the trick-or-treaters and look at them in the little pittance, demons, devils, angels, creep shows, horrors, mayhaps amongst them you may see death. For perhaps you may too share in that experience as we end tonight's night with The Murder Grew by Ricky T. Bones. If you don't know, a murder is a flock of crows. With that context, we shall finish tonight's story. And this is told from my perspective. So I no longer have to put on a strange voice, a Victorian Eeyore. Here we go. Oh, and there's peril, but there's no grotesque description, so you're free to show this one to the kids. I don't remember when this was. Perhaps fall? Maybe spring? It was in between seasons, I think. But this story takes place at a local park. The park featured a lake, a couple of sports activity centers, and was always packed. Kids go there all the time for shaved ice and sandbox castles. Adults throw down on the basketball court and share moments on the lakeside pier. Me? I just walk the path around the park, mind my own business, and overhear an odd conversation every now and again. Along this path is a miniature dam recessed well below street level. Its man-made walls keep the nature-made lake in the center of the park from flooding nearby riverbank neighborhood. Everybody loved this walking path. They even built an entire suburb around it, and it has its own park police. You should feel safe in an environment like this, what with all the fencing, security measures, and once-a-week lawn care. But for me, that all changed one fateful day. I often visited this park when I felt the need to breathe fresh air and get my circulation going. But as I approached the halfway point, the blood circulating in me ran cold. You see, for some, fences pose a challenge, maybe even a mockery. I've heard tales of kids who would scale fences just to see what was on the other side, only to wind up in the hospital with multiple dog bites. Now before me was the same issue, yet far worse. You see, across from that dam is the dried up portion of the riverbank. In the rainy season, sometimes water flows through it, but most times it's bone dry, much like your average Texas summer. In this case, the stones below were bleached white from the sun, smoothed to a near polish by the river that once flowed. Above it, a simple steel pipe fence stood between onlookers and a 20-foot drop onto the river rock below. Fully knowing all these details, you can imagine the horror I felt when my wandering eye came upon two children no older than 10. One was standing there watching the other play on the fence. Now, mind you, he was not trying to climb over it as I suggested prior, but instead, he took advantage of the open-ended nature and shimmied along the wrong side of it. I was entranced, then mesmerized, then awestruck, then horrified, and the cycle would begin again and again. What was I to do? The child had already made it about 3 feet into his daredevil stunt, and yet the 20-foot drop below him didn't seem to scare him at all. I stood about 10, possibly 15 feet away from the children. They didn't know I was there. They probably didn't even know I was watching this tragedy unfold. As I continued to watch in horror, my mind became a whirl of emotions and possible solutions. Should I speak up and try to get their attention? No. The child would get scared and fall off. There, a park police car driving by. No, he would honk his horn and the child would get distracted and fall off. Maybe I should approach them. No, the child would look my way and miss his next step. As I stood in my own fear and dread, I felt a chill in the air. I cannot describe the feeling that washed over me in that moment, but I felt the presence of someone, or something else, also witnessing this cautionary tale in the making. Something grim. As I perceived this awful energy, a crow landed on a nearby rock. It paid me no mind whatsoever, but was also entranced by the high-altitude, death-defying display. Then another perched next to it. Then another. The horrible feeling in my chest only grew as the child continued to move further and further away from safety. Not one pathwalker paid them any attention. It felt like I was watching an exclusive performance that only I could see. Not one other human there concerned themselves with the youth placing themselves in grave danger. Yet the murder grew. Crows now lined my center stage. Then some landed on the pipes further along the fencing. Some perched on the telephone wires above. All of these blackbirds were gathering as if they were kids coming out to watch a fierce thunderstorm. At that very moment, my blood ran cold. I now fully realized why the crows were there. Why the murder had flocked to this very location. I was in the presence of death. I looked about. I saw nothing. No scythe-wielding, hooded figure to be seen. Yet I could feel something. A dark center of negative, almost sorrowful energy was directly in front of me. If the Grim Reaper does exist, then in that very moment, I was only 6 feet away from him. And yet, the child continued his feat of courage and lack of self-preservation. For what seemed like an eternity, I stood there amongst the murder of crows and continued to watch, absolutely frozen with fear, waiting for him to make a mistake, wishing he would give up and return to safety. But the murder grew with each step towards the other side. Death was here, ready to take this poor, innocent child who doesn't even understand what it means to live. But then, as all seemed hopeless, the child finally grew bored of his fun and began to make his way back to the grassy field on the street level. My eyes never left him. Inch by inch, foot by foot, pipe by pipe. The child finally returned to his friend on the correct side of the pipe fence, and they both went across the street to the park filled with the oblivious citizens. Neither of them paid me, or the watchful eyes of death gazing upon them, any attention whatsoever. And yet the murder stayed. They lost interest, yes, but I could still feel the presence of death. As I looked at the murder of crows before me and pondered, perhaps in another world, I decided to act irrationally and sent the child to an early grave. Thankfully, that world isn't ours, otherwise I may not be here to write this real-life ghost tale. After considering this, I looked around once more. The murder of crows had disbanded, and my blood grew warm once again. I do still pass this spot every now and again, and I'm happy to report that the park officials have added proper chain-link fencing, so that this story may never be told again. And that, just for ceremony's effect, concludes Scary Story Night. Let me go ahead and put away this book. So what'd y'all think? I don't normally write stuff like that, so that was pretty cool. God, I feel like I ran a mile with how much, like, I don't know what to say. That was a lot more than I expected. Okay. Let's see, where is it? Oh, there it is, my beloved music. Whew. Okay, spooky but enticing. Excellent. Thank y'all for listening to me ramble and stumble my way through a couple of those stories. I think I did pretty good, yeah. That will conclude this week's interesting activities. No more streams until Monday. Oh, man. I'm tired. And you stayed 6 feet away from that good social... Yeah. I'm glad y'all enjoyed that. Like I told y'all, I had a lot of... Reading stories like that aloud was the bread and butter of my childhood. At catechism school, I would always volunteer to go up and read because nobody else knew how to speak English. I read stories aloud to my parents instead of them reading it aloud to me most of the time. And I'm an avid bookworm. I even have my own bookshelf over there off screen. And to my right, actually, now that I think about it. But it's not my books. You can read, Frankie. Your fan fiction list says otherwise. Everybody can read. It's just a matter of giving yourself the right environment and the right book. But with that being said, and you respond to chat's written messages, exactly. Wow. Never mind, you're a man of culture, apparently, who doesn't have a fan fiction list. Anyway, I'm gonna go ahead and wrap up so I can get out of this suit that I have under this cloak. What is it, fan fiction list? A reading list of potentially dangerous topics that you probably shouldn't bring up on stream. Anyway. Ooh. What the? Somebody moved the log. Or something might have collapsed. Well, you see. Yeah. With that being said, thank y'all for watching. To all the VOD watchers out there, we salute ya. And I can't believe my own... Okay, fire, you know what? You can just go douse. It's getting a little wild there. Thank y'all for watching. Can't believe... Yeah, like I said. Man. That's cool. That's... I don't think even... never mind. I don't want to... whatever. It's nice of him. He muted the... Okay, you want it back here? There. Now we're all burning alive. Just kidding. Anyway. Thank y'all for watching. As always, memento vivere, memento mori, and enjoy writing your life story. Buenas noches. Pleasant dreams.